Hey, Aubrey, you are on so many podcasts. Let me just recognize that fact first of all.
I know it's been so fun to be able to be a part of our new Business English podcast as well as All Ears English. I love recording with all of our different co-hosts. It's so much fun.
It's so awesome. So, guys, we know that talking about numbers and writing about numbers, especially, can be difficult. It seems like this should be an easy thing, right? Every language has numbers, it should be easy. But, guys, different languages express numbers differently, right? And if you try and translate that, you are going to really mess up an IELTS Task 1 academic essay where you have to talk about a bunch of numbers.
Yes, it's so tricky that you can't translate numbers directly between a lot of languages. This happens in French, Chinese, likely in your language as well. We
Mhm.
just can't translate the number directly across, which can cause you problems on the IELTS exam if you're not prepared.
Yeah, exactly. So, guys, that's why we always tell students to read the business section or the finance section of the newspaper, right? Because not only do you need to know how to write and say numbers in English, but all the vocabulary around the numbers is so important for IELTS, and not just academic, right? For general students as well. On writing task 2, you have to talk about, amounts of people sometimes if you're referring to populations, whatever. When you're giving examples on the speaking test, we use numbers. Numbers are everywhere. So that's why, guys, today we are bringing you a very special episode of the Business English podcast. Yes, the third All Ears English podcast is called Business English. So go ahead and pause right now, search Business English wherever you're listening and hit follow. But guys, we are bringing you this awesome episode today. And it'll seem familiar because Aubrey is also on there.
Yes, exactly right. This episode, we're really excited to bring it to you. Lindsay and I were teaching about big numbers and how to say them correctly in English. You need this for IELTS. And I'm glad you let them know, Jessica, to follow the Business English podcast because there's so much information and vocabulary there as well that
So
will be
good.
super useful for the IELTS exam.
So good. All right, guys. So without further ado, I don't know why I say that phrase all the time. I love it.
I love
But
it.
without further ado, let's get to that episode.
How's it going, Aubrey? How's everything?
I'm great, Lindsay. How are you?
Oh, I'm feeling good today. Today we're talking about numbers, right? Which as
Yeah.
English teachers, maybe, well, I'll speak for myself, it's not my forte.
Oh, I know, right? I'm no mathematician, but having taught French, there are some tricky things about teaching numbers in different languages because they don't all work the way numbers work in English, right, Lindsay?
It can be really tricky for sure. I've experienced that as a language learner too. So we have a
Yes.
student question, right? And we're
Yes.
just going to go ahead and say it right off the bat. Aubrey,
Yeah,
what
let's
is
do
the
it.
student's question today?
So this student asked, why do I never hear tens of millions in English? And I was able to ask the student about this, and we're going to share a couple of things in a few different languages where the number system or specific numbers work so differently than in English that it can be really confusing once you're learning English and expect it to go a certain way, expect it to go like you're
Right.
used to, and it doesn't.
Yep. Just like we can't translate directly from a language, we can't make
Yep.
assumptions about how numbers are phrased between our native languages and English, right? And so this is
Yes.
really going to apply today to the business world for everyone. This is our Business English podcast. Guys, make sure you go and hit follow, find that follow button today so that we can just drop right into your podcast listening queue. So you don't have to remember to listen. We'll just show up for you for 3 days a week, right, Aubrey?
Yes, absolutely. So be sure to hit follow wherever you find your podcasts. And for great vocab like today, this is especially important at work in business English. If you're talking about big, contracts, clients, important numbers, you want to make sure that you're clear and accurate. And so you can't translate directly. You can't expect numbers to work like in your first language.
Oh my God. So let's give our listeners some examples of what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
Right.
so-
How it can be so different. In French, how do we
Yes.
conceptualize numbers?
Yes. So in French, the numbers are different than in English. Like after 70, instead of a base 10, it's called where you're counting by tens, it's a base 20. So to say 70, you say 60-10. And to say 80, you say 4 20s. So that's really difficult for English learners to conceptualize when they're learning French.
Yes.
And for French speakers, it's tricky to learn English. You just can't translate directly.
Mm-hmm. And, these numbers can have real life consequences.
Yes, exactly.
Right? When we get into the really big numbers, the consequences get even bigger, don't they? Right? If we're buying a
Right.
house. So we want to
Yes,
make sure we get this right. Salary,
exactly.
negotiating a salary. Okay. So in Danish, coming from Danish, what do we know from that language?
Yeah, this was fascinating to me. I sort of looked up some anomalies and just very different from English. In Danish, some multiples of 10 are formed with fractions. So when they say the number 50, they say half third times 20.
Oh my gosh.
And 70 is like 3.5 times 20. So it's so
What?
interesting because growing up with that language, it would make perfect sense to someone who speaks Danish. But when you're an English learner or, anyone else learning another language coming to Danish, that's going to be a little confusing.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things. I remember in Arabic, we had some of those. I can't even articulate how it's different or how it's formed right now, but it is a
It's
matter of
different.
sitting there. If you're there in a class with your teacher says, say 75 in Arabic, you sit there and think. Right?
Right. 60 plus 15. Right.
Yeah.
That's what it would be in French. It's so
Right.
tricky.
It's so tough. So this is different from the way that we might learn a word, a vocabulary word, just by kind of knowing it. It's different in the beginning when we start as a total beginner in English. So
Right.
how is it
Yeah.
in English that we break down numbers?
Yeah, so this, what we're going to focus on today is sort of the general numbers when we estimate and generalize large numbers. And we do this all the time in business English. And this is what came up with this student question asking about tens of millions. Why don't we say tens of millions? So in English, numbers are broken down by how many thousands they have. But for example, in Chinese, it works very differently. Numbers are based off how many tens of thousands they have. So not only is our counting, our sort of general numbers very strange to someone who speaks Chinese, they
Mm-hmm.
will also be very surprised that they won't hear or don't say tens of thousands or tens of millions. So we're going to go into which terms we use in English to generalize or estimate numbers in English so that you can be sure that at work in business English, you're using the correct terms.
Yeah, and this might be very related to your currency. I'm not sure, right?
Mm,
Maybe these numbers, the language formed around the currency. Like how
yeah,
many,
that's true.
bills are we dealing with? Talking about inflation, things like that. We don't know, but it's important
Interesting.
to get this straight. So what's the pro tip here, Aubrey?
Yeah. So in English, our pro tip is to avoid saying tens of, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about small numbers, we would say dozens of instead
Yes.
of tens of, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for large numbers, we will usually say several instead of tens of. So we're going to give you lots of examples here so you see what we mean. And you're probably going to start saying, okay, yeah, that sounds familiar. I've heard that.
Yeah.
And you likely won't hear very often tens of thousands or tens of millions. We just don't say that very often.
I love that. So let's go into a little bit more detail here, Aubrey. So number one, when we talk about thousands, tell us
Yeah.
more here. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to use thousands whenever we're talking about multiple thousands, but below 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
And using the word dollars when we're talking about money is optional. So we'll always give you examples with both because you can just say, thousands or thousands of dollars.
Right. Well, for example, we'll save thousands by going with this client. You could say that.
Yep. Or you
Mm,
could say, we'll save thousands of dollars by going with this client.
right.
And
Because,
dollars is implied, so it's optional.
yeah, anytime you have the word save, that's a trigger word for money, right? So you don't need that
Exactly.
dollar. Yeah.
Yeah. And even time, right? You might say, I have spent thousands of hours on this project. And we
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say tens of thousands of hours, right? We're just
Yeah.
going to keep it more general and just say thousands of hours.
Yeah. Now, I know our listeners probably have heard, though, tens of thousands, right? Out in the world, this cost me like tens of thousands. In some way, they've heard it. Yeah. What do you
Yeah, it's
think?
not like we never say it, right?
Right.
I
But
feel I feel like I don't hear it often
yeah.
because we're always trying to save time. And tens of thousands means the same to me as thousands because we're just talking about sort of a general number. We're not getting
Right.
specific.
Yes.
Anything below 100,000, it means the same to say thousands or tens of thousands. So why
Mm-hmm.
would we add those extra syllables? So
Good
you may
question.
hear that. It's not grammatically wrong, but we usually will just eliminate it to save time.
Yeah, let's save time. Let's be succinct and direct. So let's just eliminate that and just say thousands, guys.
Yeah.
So much
Or
easier.
what you might hear instead, we mentioned this a minute ago, is several thousand.
Yeah.
I would more likely say, we saved several $1,000s by going this way instead of we saved tens of thousands of dollars.
I love that. Okay, when it comes to hundreds of thousands, let's get higher, right?
Well, this is just above 100,000.
100,000.
We're going to start saying hundreds of thousands.
Okay, so yeah, so for example, we're hundreds of thousands. What? Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands away from our goal.
Away from our
Or you
goal.
could say we're hundreds of thousands of dollars away from our goal. Same, where the dollars is optional.
Or they're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Write this down, guys, because it could be a little complicated. So write it down. What else, Aubrey?
Yeah, here's an interesting note that if you do use several instead of like tens of or hundreds of, you would need dollars, right? You couldn't say they're several hundred thousands in debt. You need that several $100,000 in debt, almost as if several replaces an actual number.
Ooh, so good to know. Love it. Okay. Number 2, the second one we need to know here is millions, talking about millions.
Yes, and the same rules apply, right? We'll give you more example sentences here, but when we say millions, we're talking about multiple millions, but below 100 million.
Yeah. So for example, guys, the contract is worth millions, right? Millions of dollars. That's assumed.
Yes, exactly. And you see how general we stay, right? This is where all we need to know is it's worth millions. Maybe we're exaggerating here, or maybe this is pretty accurate, but we're just, whatever the conversation is, we're not getting into specific numbers. We're staying general, we're estimating, and we'll just say millions for anything below 100 million.
Yes. And the next one, what would be another example?
Yeah, you might say their budget is millions of dollars. And again, that dollars is optional. You could just say their budget is millions.
Yes. And tens of millions. What do you think?
Yeah, you might hear it every now and then, just like tens of thousands.
Yeah.
But again, we usually will just say millions because it means the same thing. Millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. All I'm doing is adding syllables for myself, so you're not going to hear it very often.
Oh my gosh. Now the numbers are getting really big.
Yes.
Right. Numbers we don't deal with every day. So hundreds of millions. What about that?
Yeah. So you might say the contract is for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Whoa.
And it's interesting how they both have to be plural. Hundreds of millions. All three.
That is interesting.
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
That is a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
Or for example, their client has hundreds of millions of dollars invested in real estate. Yeah.
Yes. And you can keep in mind that you can use several for all of these, right? The contract is for several $100 million. And if you add several, notice how all of those become singular.
Oh,
several $100 million.
Maybe
100 million becomes singular.
Maybe we should make a course, Aubrey, on
Ooh, I like
this.
that.
Because I feel like this is something our listeners need the app, right? They need to listen. They need to see these things written. Guys, if you want that, let us know. Send me an email to Lindsay@AllEarsEnglish.com because we are going to be in the business of making new business English courses this fall. And there's a lot that we could do, but we want to make courses that you guys are looking for. So
Yes,
could be a
whenever we have-
candidate.
Whenever we have a podcast on here that you guys think, I want to know more, I want more like
Yes.
this, let us know because that would be a great way to build a course.
That would be really cool. Okay, Aubrey. So now let's get into a role play. Let's make it real. We are accountants.
Yes.
Oh, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. It's not my personality.
You'll have to harness your skills of an actress here.
Oh God, I'm just not detail oriented enough to be an accountant because I just feel like that numbers are never 100% correct.
That's going to be really appropriate for this role play because we're discussing an audit we're performing and the numbers are just not adding up.
Okay, there we go. All right. These numbers aren't adding up. They're off by millions.
Oh, wow. Could be worse, I guess. At least they're not off by hundreds of millions.
Well, true. Let's go through and see where they're off.
It looks like the wrong number was inputted for sales in 2022. It's off by several 100,000.
Oh my gosh, that is my nightmare scenario, having to do that. No, never.
It really does sound
Stick
miserable,
to
especially if
podcasting.
you're off by this much. You'd be like, whoa, we have a serious problem here.
What happened? All right. So what we did here, guys, first I said these numbers aren't adding up. And that's a bonus phrase for today. Adding up. Really good one. Meaning what, Aubrey? Meaning
Yeah, it means they don't make sense. There's
Right.
something wrong. They don't match what your expectation is.
And here it's kind of a double meaning, right? Like literally we're adding the numbers
And they're literally not adding up. That's true because we use it idiomatically for anything. It would be like your actions aren't
Yes.
adding up for what I would expect for your behavior.
Yeah.
And then we also use it more literally. Like these numbers aren't
fun.
adding up.
It's always fun when you can use a word in a literal and metaphorical sense at the same time.
It's true.
That's a pro tip. That's so good. 99% fluency, guys. So they're off by millions.
Yeah.
Right?
And so this is the kind of situation where you're not going to share the specific number. Imagine if the number is like, 15,987,652. Like no one has time for you to say that number. You're going to instead just say millions or several million.
We stay broad until we have to really get into the details, and then we have to find an accountant to do it.
Right.
All right. So what did you say after that?
I said, ooh, that's terrible, but at least they're not off by hundreds of millions. And I could again here say several hundred million, but keep in mind that those two words become singular if I use several to replace the number.
That's a really important call out here, Aubrey, right? They become singular once we say several hundred million. Guys, listen to this again if everything's not clear, right? This is the kind of episode you may want to listen to twice. Yes.
Yep.
What else,
And
Aubrey?
my last one here, I used several and said it's off by several 100,000. Means the same thing as saying it's off by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh
Ooh,
my
so
gosh.
interesting.
Ooh, so guys, for the takeaway today, Aubrey, is make
Don't
sure
be
you
an
have a
accountant.
great accountant to take care of this for you. That's number one. And I'm sure we have many listeners who are accountants, and I bet you guys are great at your jobs.
And
we
they're
need
probably
accountants.
laughing at us because
Yeah.
they're like, oh, you
It's so
silly. It
easy.
would not be that hard.
That is so simple and easy, right? We need great accountants in this world for sure. I guess the key is just knowing what we do well. Like, how does your brain think? Does it think in terms of numbers, or does it think in some other way? Explore that, right? Give some
Yes.
space for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this like large numbers, terms for estimating numbers is just another way that it's important to remember not to translate directly from your first language, because some things like this just don't work. It's not going to make sense, and the numbers will be wrong if you try to translate them directly from a lot of first languages.
And as we said earlier, the stakes are higher the bigger the numbers get, right? You're dealing with signing for a mortgage or doing a deal at work. We really
Big
want to make sure,
contracts.
we want to make sure we're confident with these numbers. So let us know, guys, if you're interested in a course on this. I could see us making a really cool little course on how to read numbers, how to say numbers in English in business. So good stuff, Aubrey. Thanks for hanging out and creating this episode for us today.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'll see you next time.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, there are so many pro tips in there.
Yes, right. My favorite is avoiding saying tens of, right? It's really easy to
Interesting.
get this wrong. Native English speakers don't say this. And when you say a number, that you can say dollars or not. So many great tips here.
Yep, exactly. And I love that tip also. Like if you say several before the number, then you have to say dollars after. There are so many little rules that I notice students just don't know, just have never learned on IELTS. You're reading a task one essay, right? And they don't talk about the numbers correctly. They don't refer to the units of measurement correctly. And that's part of your task score, guys, is being able to describe these numbers accurately. So again, oh my gosh, this episode is so useful for you guys. For more very useful vocabulary and strategies, not just for IELTS, guys, but of course for your life after IELTS. When you have your dream job and you're just using a bunch of English, search for the Business English podcast right now, guys, wherever you're listening, and make sure to hit follow. Aubrey, you're on there quite a bit, right?
Yes, it's about half of the episodes are Lindsay and I, and about half are Michelle and Lindsay. We have 3 new episodes every week.
Awesome.
And like you were saying, not only will it help you on the IELTS exam, but IELTS is not the end goal. Most of you will be working in English, having friends and a great network in English. You want to be ready for that. So the Business
Totally.
English podcast is a great way to do that.
Totally. So again, guys, Business English, search for that wherever you're listening. Look for that bright yellow of All Ears English and hit follow. All right, awesome. Aubrey, thanks for having 2 episodes in one today.
Thank you, Jessica. I'll see you guys over on the Business English podcast as well. And I'll see you next time, Jessica.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.